Israel has agreed today to what's called a humanitarian pause in its attacks on Gaza. It will last for 5 hours tomorrow to allow Palestinian civilians to restock food and supplies. But it comes with a warning that Palestinian attacks on Israel during that ceasefire will bring retaliation. Late today, President Obama had this to say.
The Israeli people and the Palestinian people don't want to live like this. They deserve to live in peace and security, free from fear. And that's why we're going to continue to encourage diplomatic efforts to restore the ceasefire, and we support Egypt's continued efforts to bring this about.
The Israeli offer of a ceasefire comes after the deaths of 4 Palestinian boys on a beach where they were struck by shells fired by the Israeli Navy. In the past 9 days, more than 200 Palestinians, most of them civilians, have been killed. 1 Israeli has been killed, and there was a funeral for him today. Israel said today that there is, quote, a very high likelihood that it will launch a ground invasion of Gaza next. And Holly Williams is in Gaza City.
The 4 children were killed as they played on the beach in Gaza City. The youngest was just 9 years old. Israel says it's targeting terrorists, but these people lost their sons. God take revenge on Israel, said this woman, whose 2 boys were both killed in the attack. My child is a martyr, cried this man. He died for the Palestinians. The Israeli military says it's trying to avoid civilian casualties and has dropped leaflets on neighbourhoods in northern Gaza, warning residents to evacuate because of its plans to bomb the area. But at Al-Wafa Hospital, Dr. Basman Alashi told us his patients are mostly elderly and can't be moved.
Cancer survivor, paralyzed, cannot move. A stroke, she cannot move, paralyzed. Infection in the spinal cord, paralyzed all the day, she cannot move. They cannot walk by themselves. If I take her out of here, that means I'm risking her life, and I'm not going to do this.
The Israeli military claims there are rocket launchers near the hospital and hit it with a non-explosive warning missile on Saturday, a sign that an airstrike could be imminent. So Dr. Basman asked his Western friends to come and stay, hoping their presence would deter Israel from attacking again. One of them is Joe Catrone, an activist from Brooklyn, New York, who told us he's reluctantly become a human shield.
I really don't like the dynamics of it, the fact that we're doing something that's based on foreign blood being more valuable than Palestinian blood.
Holly Williams is joining us from Gaza. Holly, what has Israel said about this airstrike on the beach that killed the boys?
Well, Scott, the Israeli military says it had no intention of harming civilians and is investigating what happened. But Israel also continues to blame the Palestinian militants for civilian deaths here in Gaza because it says the militants put their rocket launchers in residential areas and use ordinary Palestinians as human shields.
And the vast majority of deaths in this conflict, civilian. Tonight, we have the first look at a Pentagon investigation into why so many American troops remain missing in action. 83,000 are still unaccounted for in wars dating back to World War II. The findings of this investigation haven't been seen until this report from Chip Reed.
What does it mean to you to have your brother finally buried here?
Well, he's home.
It took Mickey Beard decades of fighting the Pentagon bureaucracy to get her older brother, Staff Sergeant George Winkler, buried at Arlington National Cemetery. He was killed in the Philippines in 1945, but not laid to rest here until 2011.
I couldn't get anybody to pay any attention to me. They just said, well, they didn't know what happened to them.
The Pentagon agencies responsible for identifying and bringing home America's war dead have long been criticized by frustrated families, and a draft report by the Pentagon Inspector General obtained by CBS News shows that criticism is well-deserved. The report says dozens of former and current employees, most with the Joint POW MIA Command, or JPAC, have filed complaints that paint a picture of long-term leadership and management problems resulting in a hostile and dysfunctional work environment. There is no clearly defined mission, no strategic plan, and no single database that lists all MIAs from past conflicts. A lack of coordination, the report says, that leaves the Pentagon agencies unable to know who is actually missing. In February, Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel ordered a major shakeup.
And what that means to families is, first, they will be communicated with clearly, directly, and it'll be communications from one central location. That has not been the case.
But many World War II families believe they've been all but forgotten.
They're probably waiting for all of us to go away.
The government holds annual meetings for the families of those killed in Korea and Vietnam and even pays for travel. But World War II families, like Beard's, get none of that. And while the government has pushed to get family DNA samples for 80% of the missing from Korea and Vietnam, they've collected less than 5% from families of World War II MIAs, making them harder to identify.
Do you think your brother was treated like a hero who died in war?
No.
What was he treated like?
Just somebody that didn't come home, I guess.
Beard hopes that when the Pentagon releases the report on what's wrong, JPAC will make it right and bring the thousands of other heroes still missing back home.
This evening, President Obama also announced he is significantly tightening the economic sanctions against Russia for its actions in Ukraine. Moscow is accused of backing rebels who are fighting Ukraine's government. The new sanctions target 2 Russian banks, 2 Russian energy firms, and 8 companies that make small arms, mortars, and tanks. They're now cut off from U.S. capital markets. In his appearance in the White House briefing room today, the president talked not only about Ukraine and the Middle East, but Afghanistan and Iran as well. He said, "It's a complex world." Bob Schieffer, our chief Washington correspondent and anchor of Face the Nation, is with us tonight. Bob, the president's facing a world of trouble.
Well, when he said it's a complex world, that may be the understatement of the year. You know, John McCain said the other day that he could never recall a time when so many places were in such turmoil over so many different things. You heard the president talk today about putting sanctions on Russia. Not so long ago, we were trying to get Russia's help in tamping down the Syrian civil war. We were wanting Russia to help us in trying to rein in Iran's nuclear capability. We didn't get much help with them there. And just to underline that whole idea of complexity, we now find ourselves on the same side of with Syria and Iran in trying to do something about this group called ISIS that has now claimed so much territory in Iraq, where so much American blood and treasure was expended. I don't want to be overly dramatic here tonight, Scott, but I think that we are in a very dangerous time right now, even more so perhaps than at the height of the Cold War with the Soviet Union. In those days, we had a clearly identifiable enemy. We knew what they were up to. Now, we seem to be immersed in a series of events that are totally out of control. If they're not out of control, they're unpredictable. The Secretary of State is flying around almost nonstop from one crisis to another. So far, he's gotten them to re-audit the vote in Afghanistan, but otherwise, not much is happening there. This is a very dangerous time.
Bob, we'll see you on Sunday on Face the Nation. Thanks very much. The head of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention was called to Capitol Hill today to answer for all those safety lapses that we've been telling you about, including the mishandling of bird flu virus and anthrax. We have more now from Dr. John LaPook.
How do we improve the culture of safety at CDC? And I think that's going to involve a number of steps that we think will succeed, but will take time.
Members of Congress were skeptical. Representatives Jan Schakowsky and Tim Murphy.
Whenever I hear the word culture and a cultural problem, I know we have a real challenge on our hands.
The Center for Disease Control is supposed to be the gold standard of the U.S. public health system, and it has been tarnished.
Committee members were troubled by a USDA inspection report that found record-keeping and security were lax, and some materials were transferred in Ziploc bags between labs.
What in heaven's name would go through the minds of some scientists thinking a Ziploc bag is enough to protect someone from anthrax?
The CDC oversees the handling of about 80 dangerous pathogens called special agents. These pathogens are being handled by an increasing number of highly secure labs separate from the CDC.
Do you have the authority to control other labs throughout the country that don't officially belong to the CDC?
CDC regulates laboratories that work with select agents, certain of the most dangerous microbes, and we have in the past shut some of these laboratories if there are lapses in protocol.
But the General Accounting Office told Congress no federal entity is responsible for strategic planning and oversight of high containment laboratories.
So in essence, there's no single person or agency in charge of regulating lab safety across the country. The CDC has 4 labs capable of running at the highest BSL-4 safety level, but there are 9 other labs capable of this level, and they are not directly operated by the CDC.
And to be clear, the man testifying today was the head of the CDC, Dr. Tom Frieden. John, thank you very much. The president is meeting this evening with congressional leaders on the surge of illegal immigrant children on the southern border. Today, a Pew Center poll found that 53% of Americans support accelerating the legal deportation process, while 38% want to stay with the current policy. There are nearly 9,000 illegal immigrant children in U.S. custody now, waiting for a hearing on whether they can stay. Those children were part of a surge of more than 57,000 unaccompanied minors who've come from Central America just since last October. Manuel Bojorquez went to El Salvador to find out why so many children are headed north. Tonight, he has Raul's story.
Here, if you don't do certain things, your life is going to end anyways. And it's better to try than to just stay and die.
16-year-old Raul told us he gets daily threats from the gangs that rule the streets across most of this country.
What's that like? Well, it's really horrible because you feel like your life is in danger. You feel like you don't have freedom to walk down the streets. And in my neighborhood, a couple of days ago, they already killed like 2 or 3 guys that are my age because they didn't want to join them. You stop being the kid you were.
Raul once knew a better life. His father, who was living in the U.S. on a temporary visa, brought him and his family to St. Paul, Minnesota illegally. When the visa ran out in 2012, the family was deported back to El Salvador. Raul's father opened a small shop with the money he brought back from the United States. That made him a target for extortion by gangs. He feared for his family and arranged for Raul to make a run for the U.S.
It's so dangerous to try to enter the United States illegally. Your dad was okay with you doing that. Why?
Because he knew that if I make it, it's going to be 1,000 times better than to me to stay here. You don't feel safe here. You don't feel safe at all.
He became one of thousands of minors to flee El Salvador in the last 9 months. This time, he only got as far as Mexico.
I started to cry because, you know, my dream was to get to the U.S.
2 weeks after his return, the gang threats against his family worsened.
Suddenly, we just find my dad dead. And
he found his father shot and left in a field, like so many others.
I cry a lot at night because I remember him. I wanted to take care of him when he was old, you know, and spend good time with him and everything. And that's not possible. And it really hurts.
Do you live every day with a sense of fear about what happened to your father or might happen to you?
I wake up every morning and I hope that it's not going to be my last day.
Manuel Bojorquez is joining us from San Salvador. Manuel, if not his last day, what does Raul expect to happen next?
Well, Scott, he told us that he is considering once again trying to enter the United States, but that's complicated by the fact that now at 16, he is the man of the house and must support his mother and sister.
Manuel Bojorquez with insight into America's immigration problem. Manuel, thank you. In a first, the insurance industry today put out a list of recommended used cars for teenagers. Young drivers are most at risk, especially during the summer, when deadly accidents rise by 26%. Jeff Begay says this new list is aimed at those who buy the cars, mom and dad.
For many parents, it came down to sticking to a budget. Out of 500 surveyed, 83% of those who bought vehicles for their children chose a used car. Ann McCart is with the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety.
The issue isn't that they're used per se, it's that a used vehicle is likely to be older. And if it's older, it's less likely to have good safety technology.
Based on crash test ratings, the IIHS has compiled a list of dozens of used vehicles, some a decade old, with important safety technology. They are either under $20,000 or under $10,000. There's the Acura TL 2004 or later, the Honda Odyssey 2011 or later, as well as the Dodge Avenger 2011 or later. The vehicles singled out by the IIHS have features like electronic stability control, which can help a driver stay on the road in a curve or in slick conditions.
Electronic stability control reduces the risk of a fatal single vehicle crash by about half.
The IIHS says parents should avoid vehicles with high horsepower for their teens. And there is another factor to consider, and that is size. Scott, they say follow this rule of thumb in picking a car for your teenager. Choose one that is big, slow, and ugly.
Jeff Pegues, thanks very much. Now, we have a complete list of the vehicles recommended by the insurance agency. You'll find the list.
Before you hit the road with your family this summer, you're about to learn some of the secrets of those speed traps from a former police officer. The average cost of a ticket about $150, as you might know. Tonight, the question, are some towns rewarding the police officers who pull you over the most? Here's ABC Steve Osunsami.
We know, sometimes it can seem so unfair. You're driving on summer vacation and the speed limit suddenly drops for a very short stretch, and waiting under the sign is a friendly police officer writing tickets like there's no tomorrow. Meet Kurt Scarjoon, a retired Detroit area cop.
I said to myself that when I got a chance to speak out about it, that I would.
He says cities and counties make big money from speed traps, and it's like shooting fish in a barrel.
It's like dirty secret.
But across the country, tourists and other drivers are fighting back, reporting more than 82,000 speed traps since 2000 to the National Speed Trap Exchange, warning other families on the roads. Houston ranks #1 with nearly 500 reported since 2000. But the police lights are flashing all across the country. Along I-71 in Lindale, Ohio, the speed drops to 60 for about 14 seconds on the highway. And before a court stepped in, the tiny town collected $800,000 a year. And along I-10 in the middle of Cajun country, 80% of the budget for Henderson, Louisiana was covered by speeding tickets handed out at the bottom of this bridge. There's now a class action lawsuit brought by drivers alleging that police got paid extra for writing citations.
The law clearly and unequivocally provides that officers cannot be paid by the ticket.
My police chief in Georgia took me out for a little driver's ed near a hill I've had trouble with near my home.
You need to start to cover that brake with your foot.
The chief says these aren't speed traps, they're just trying to slow drivers down, and he says families on the road this summer should put safety first.
Joining me now, CNN legal analyst Mel Robbins and our senior legal correspondent, host from CNN's Reliable Sources, Brian Stelter. So to both of you, welcome. And Brian Stelter, listen, it's your job to watch a lot of TV and read a lot of newspapers, so I just want to begin with you as far as the perspective from media, because going back to Richard Jewell, I remember being at those Olympics, and I think a lot of people even forget that he was cleared because he was so totally vilified. I mean, he said that he lived for 88 days afraid of, being arrested for a crime he didn't commit. Is that fair, that comparison in this case?
I understand why they're making it, because it conjures up an image in our minds that is sympathetic to this woman. Oftentimes in this news cycle we live in, an initial story is a Category 5, and then the follow-up is a Category 1. There's usually not as much attention later on. In some cases, maybe it is comparable, but we don't know enough in this case to know if it's really a fair comparison.
Mel, you wrote this opinion piece on CNN.com even before the statement from the lawyer from this mother. Do you stand by it? The fact that, listen, it's easy to speculate, but let's be fair, basically?
Yes, absolutely, Brooke. I mean, come on. We can all sit at home and watch television and sit back and say, oh,
she's not crying enough. Ooh, what a weird statement
Which
to make.
many people have done, let's be fair.
Of course. But all of them have a completely benign explanation to them. It's one thing to look at the husband's case who's behind bars. It's another thing to incite a riot around this woman's guilt regarding the death of her son. I think this statement by the attorney was spot on. Leave her alone.
Let me go through some of the points because I would love to hear, you know, you're a parent as well. So with your mother hat on as well here, Mel Robbins, let me just ask you, you know, because a lot of people keep going back to the day that we got from this probable cause hearing when you hear from this detective talking about on the day little Cooper died, you know, this mother arrives at the daycare and finds out that her son hadn't been dropped off. And apparently she initially thought, you know, oh, my husband must have left my child in the car. And then the second thing about how she and her husband were in this police interrogation room, maybe not realizing other people were listening, and said, well, did you say too much? It's suspect on one level.
You know, Brooke, I totally agree with you. I thought the same thing. Let's take them one at a time.
Okay.
The statement at the daycare. If, in fact, it is her worst nightmare to have her son die in a hot car, and she arrives to pick the kid up and he's not there, it might just be maternal instinct, deepest fear. I write in the article that my husband and I got 2 phone calls back to back and then a third one at the house, and I turned to him for no reason, Brooke, and said, I bet the school's on lockdown. And sure enough, it was for 4 hours. It just happened this spring. So, and we also, by the way, don't know if he had sent her an email or a text, for example, saying, I'm so sorry, and she's putting things together in her head. The second thing, did you say too much? Well, if the guy did make a mistake and then botched the explanation and cover-up of it, and now there's sexts and their financial information and everything is being scrutinized in the media, she probably is thinking, what did you say? You know, if this was a mistake, why are you behind bars? Did you say too much, you dummy? Not dummy like you're guilty, but dummy like you made everybody think you did this?
Yeah.
What?
No, and I hear you loud and clear, but then the question
could be
comes.
saying more. She could be speaking on her own.
But Brian, what is the line for media coverage on this kind of story? Because it could go either way. We just don't know yet.
Well, I think these conversations are important, you know, because we have to think about those issues and not rush to these judgments. On the other hand, she could be doing more. It's not just her attorney. She could be doing more to state her case.
Wait a minute, though, Brian. No way. You want to know why? Because in the state of Georgia, she has no spousal privilege. She will be called as a witness to testify against her husband because she does not have any protection whatsoever in this type of crime. So any statement that she makes right now could be used against her in a court of law if, in fact, they end up prosecuting him.
Well, this is a negative consequence of the media, but Brooke, I'll tell you about one positive consequence. I noticed this morning. I was in Dallas driving to the airport on the way back to New York. Big sign on the top of the road. It said, never leave a child alone in a car. If a child's alone in a car, get help. This is a national issue now, and that's not because of the court case. That's because of the media's coverage of the case. So
I know.
there is some positive.
Read a story just this morning, I think it was out of Texas, of some kids, you know, banging on a car, and they were left inside, locked in there, and just total strangers helped get them out. So the awareness is there. We'll see how it goes as far as this mother is concerned. Mel Robbins and Brian Stelter, thank you very much. I appreciate both of you.
Well, it was just grueling. However, I think that the boat people did a great job in making it as comfortable as possible for us.
One bad ride and cab companies can lose it all.
We had a couple of nasty ones just
like bad attitudes.
But one Washington cab company is working to change riders' perception with Charm School. Como TV says taxi drivers are taking a lesson in customer service and hospitality with the help of South Seattle College, a move to compete against the rise of on-demand car services like Uber and Lyft that tout superior customer service.
We're actually taking our time, and spending money and trying to make a change in this industry.
Instructor Dr. Hannah Gala says the classes will help improve the driver-rider relationship.
How to make yourself standing out and being memorable in a good way.
The yellow cab drivers are hoping the charm offensive will pay off on the road. Emily Roseman, The Associated Press.
I'm James Chow. Let's begin in Brazil with the President Xi Jinping, who's given a keynote there mapping out the direction for future partnership between the BRICS member states. Xi Jinping says the 5 countries should first push for necessary reforms to inject momentum into their respective economies. He says the BRICS should put forward policies concerning public welfare and those that improve the quality of their economic growth. He's also proposed expanding integrated markets for trade and finance and deepening its cooperation on infrastructure programs. He also called for the operation of the BRICS New Development Bank and the contingent reserve arrangement as soon as possible, also pointing to the importance of global environments for BRICS countries' economic development. The president said the 5 countries should pursue a bigger role and presence in the global economic system. With regards to foreign policy, he says the member states should act on equality and preserve international justice. Xi Jinping again emphasized Beijing's path for peaceful development and said China cherishes cooperation within the BRICS framework.
Shame on you! BBC! Tell the truth! BBC! Tell the truth! Boycott BBC! Boycott BBC! Boycott BBC! Shame on you! BBC! Shame on you! BBC! Stop the massacre! Stop the massacre! Stop the massacre! Are you gonna kill us? Are you gonna kill us? Are you gonna start? Free! 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 Free!
احترم دستور البلاد وقوانينها ونظامها الجمهوري ووحدة الأمة العربية. أرادوها ثورة فكنتم أنتم.
They wanted a revolution, but you have been the real revolutionaries. I congratulate you for your revolution and for your victory. Soon we will see how the Arab countries, the countries of the region and the West who supported terrorism will pay dearly. We have warned that what is happening will not stop at the borders of Syria, but extend beyond, because terrorism knows no borders.
A sudden blast followed by wild flames. In just several minutes, the fire had devoured the bus down to its frame.
The bus exploded all of a sudden and then kept burning for 10 minutes.
2 people were killed at the scene, another 32 suffered burns. This passenger is lucky. She was just 3 steps away from the disaster.
I heard people screaming and thought they were fighting. I thought I'd better get off and stay away from the trouble, so I did. I just walked 3 steps from the bus when suddenly I felt a heat wave behind me throw me forward.
A statement on the local police microblog revealed that they had arrested a suspect who had confessed to arson. Surnamed O, the suspect is a 25-year-old man who comes from Hunan province in central China. He confessed to police that he committed the crime because he was desperate after having gambled and lost a lot of money. Meanwhile, the injured are currently receiving treatment in hospital. 8 of them are in critical condition.
The Nuclear Regulation Authority approved this morning Kyushu Electric Power's report on the Sendai power plant safety. It doesn't mean the reactor should restart. It is, of course, up to the companies, the citizens of this region, and the government to make this decision based on our evaluation.
What about the volcanoes, the shelters? Where should we go if something goes wrong? It is unthinkable to restart the reactors in these conditions.
The tentative ruling was to deny the defendant's release on their own recognizance.
This case is about 2 adults who were engaged in mutual consensual drug usage in the context of a sexual encounter initiated and encouraged by Mr. Hayes. There was no intent to harm or injure, much less kill Mr. Hayes. Why would she? He was a lucrative source of income to her. She appreciated his generosity, and she had a motive, if any, to elongate, not end the relationship. At the end of the day, all the speculation and the sensation and the hype is not evidence. We're confident it's clearly not a murder case, and we don't believe, although we're still gathering evidence, that it's a voluntary manslaughter case.